we are. Here we are again. We are back. Let's see if this is going here. I'm gonna mute that. And then we can double check here. Maybe there. Is this one working? Maybe not, maybe not. Let's go over here again. Oh, it's working. Yay! It's finally working. I'm so excited. Hi, Carrie. Hi, Lynn. Hello. Freedom Rivera. Welcome. Welcome in. Good evening, everybody. Oh, I'm just, for some reason, really struggle with my setups over here. So I'm gonna have to work on that. But here we are. Welcome. Sorry, I was blowing on my mouse. Here we go. Good evening, Okra Sweet Tea. Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. Hello, Lee. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. So I'm so glad I made it tonight to my Tuesdays. I'm really trying hard here. This is very important to me that we make these Tuesdays actually work. So for everybody, including myself. So I'm glad I could be here. Hello from LA. Hi, Ruth, Alice. Yes, good evening. Oh, there's Chris. Hi. Welcome in, everybody. So, oh my gosh, my setup here, everybody. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh my gosh. Oh, of course, happy to be here. But I will remind everyone that, in the show Friends with Monica, who's very organized, she has a closet that's just complete destruction. And that's like outside of this frame, it's complete destruction. So you have to make sure we stay in frame because it's gonna be a mess. Oh, hello, Doughboy. Hi, Kaya, Carrie, hello. Yes, welcome. I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to be going forward. So, oh, it's been a rough few days for me, but when you have the rough days, then you look forward to the days that aren't rough. And then you're like, look, I'm winning. I'm officially winning now because, it's not as bad as that. So that's kind of nice. So tonight, everyone, I do want to go through the Newsom v. Trump case. I mean, there's like a million of these. But this one, of course, is dealing with the National Guard and the judge. Oh my goodness gracious. We're going to get a history lesson, and I really appreciate that from this judge. Because there's a lot of history that goes with the posse comitatus doctrine piece, right? So we have to keep in mind originally, it was after the Civil War, so, blah, blah, blah. But then it has been used multiple other times. And right now, our judge here in the Northern District of California is saying, look, you guys are violating this. And a violation of the posse comitatus is up to 2 years in prison. So, I mean, that's pretty significant, right? So that's quite a bit. Yes. So yeah, this is such a great case, I think, and it's so well organized. So I do want to get through. We've got some great introductory pieces, and then this judge too isn't like pulling any punches. He's just very clear, like, nope, no, we're not doing that. Oh, we love that. Oh my gosh, the screen names, everybody, are just mm-hmm. All right. Yes. Okay, you're on the case already. Good for you. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Hello. So let me get my sticky note up and running here. And then I think we've got plenty of amazing mods in here and friends. So we should be okay to just kind of dive into the case here. But let's set it out here. So let's see. We've got Newsom. This is such a huge deal. Huge deal. regarding state versus federal power, like enormous. So that's kind of a, we have to walk a careful line, because once it's up to the U.S. Supreme Court, we don't know what's going to happen. We truly just don't know at this point. You can't predict anything with this particular court. But, until then, it seems like at the district court levels and even that first level of appeals, the judges are being very careful with the law in making their decisions. So they're the ones that are blocking most of this stuff, and then it gets up to SCOTUS, and SCOTUS is like, man, whatever. Because they're jerks. Yeah, I said it. Oh my goodness, yes. Is that right? Newsom. Oh, nope. I'm so glad you caught that. There we go. Look, double M. We fixed it. Woohoo! Oh my goodness. I'm glad you told me. Love the nails. Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, I've got, I'm kind of really wanting to do a lot of blue lately, so this is for fun, for sure. So I just have a lot of fun doing that. All right, so we should be good to go here. Oh, thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate that. Yeah, Newsom. Did I spell it wrong? I mean, it's Newsom, right? At all. At all. So, there you go. Dust, are you asking me? I am a supporter of the Constitution. I'm here for the integrity of the Constitution. So, that's for me. We don't kick anybody out, but we also don't have any kind of fake false information. So that's kind of where we're at here. We're a learning place. We're learners here. Oh my gosh. Yes. All right. So Gavin Newsom versus Trump here. And this is, of course, the case number. We are in the Northern District of California. And this was filed just this morning, so kind of a big deal. And what? So Republican or Democrat or in between? I'm whichever party is properly following the Constitution, that's what I support. So I think people are people. People are not parties. So I don't go and vote for a particular party. I vote for the people's. Yeah. So, yes, the thumbs up. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Well, we've got some trolls tonight. That's all right. You can let them come in and flap along. I will leave that up to your discretion. Oh, goodness gracious. Yes, we do listen and learn here. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. Everyone's doing okay, and then just let me know if anybody gets, too far out of line. Screenshots, right? Screenshots and FBI file. That's the route that we go here. Yes, and remember, deprivation of oxygen or the ability to talk and be paid attention to will shrivel up the trolls. So here we go. Opinion granting injunctive relief. Now, the judge here also does a really good job of kind of going through what actually happened at that time. So, hold on, I forgot to get my lozenge here. Whew. Although sometimes it is fun to feed the trolls, but that's more of like a Friday thing. Oh my gosh. All right, here we go. Congress spoke clearly in 1878. 1878. When it passed the Posse Comitatus Act prohibiting the use of U.S. military to execute domestic law. Nearly, just one moment. Here we go. Nearly 140 years later, defendants, President Trump, Secretary of Defense Hegseth, and Department of Defense deployed the National Guard and Marines to Los Angeles. Now, I'm always a little worried about this because whenever I've done anything on the DOD, I've gotten dinged on it. But that's been over on TikTok, so maybe they'll leave me be here. Yikes! All right, so Marines to Los Angeles, ostensibly to quell a rebellion and ensure that federal immigration law was enforced. There were indeed protests in Los Angeles, and some individuals engaged in violence. Yet, there was no rebellion. And this is one of the most important pieces, right? Is there an emergency? Is there a rebellion? The definitions of those words are going to just slice through a lot of our litigation here. There was no rebellion, nor was civilian law enforcement unable to respond to the protests, which again is another exception when there may be some military involvement, and enforce the law. Nevertheless, the defendant's orders, and contrary to Congress's explicit instruction, federal troops executed the laws. The evidence at trial, which keep in mind too, this court has gone to trial. They've looked at it. This is the final decision. The evidence at trial established that defendants systematically used armed soldiers whose identity was often obscured by protective armor and military vehicles to set up protective parameters and traffic blockades, engaged in crowd control, and otherwise demonstrate a military presence in and around Los Angeles. In short, defendants violated the Posse Comitatus Act. So that's really what we're talking about here. Well, that's an excellent question, disabled veteran. That's an excellent question. I think due process is definitely one of the things being sacrificed by how quickly the government's trying to do things. So going through and figuring out if Posse Comitatus is at play, that's going to be a huge question, because they're trying to find the quickest way to get everything done that they want. That's why they need an emergency. That's why they need to say civilian law isn't good enough, because if they do that, then they can go in quicker. Right, so yeah, absolutely. Almost 3 months after defendants first deployed the National Guard to Los Angeles, 300 National Guard members remain stationed there. So we still have 300. And my question too was, are they, where are they from? Are they California National Guard? I mean, I'm curious, I don't know. Because it says here they deployed National Guard and Marines to Los Angeles. So that could be just somewhere inside of California and then brought them in. But I'm not sure, I'm just curious about that. From Afghanistan, well, hello, welcome. So we've got 300 still there. Moreover, President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have stated their intention to call National Guard troops into federal service in other cities across the country, including Oakland and San Francisco, here in the Northern District of California, thus creating a national police force with the president as its chief, right? So this is some pretty scary stuff here, right there. Yikes. Because there is an ongoing risk that defendants will act unlawfully and thereby injure plaintiffs, Governor Newsom in the state of California, the court enjoins defendants from violating the Posse Comitatus Act as detailed below. So he's putting into place, he's saying, look, I'm going to walk you through this, but there are things you are not allowed to do here. Right. Yep. All right. So here's our procedural history. On June 9th, it seems like it was a year ago, but it was just like 2 months ago. June 9th of 2025, plaintiffs filed this case bringing 3 causes of action against defendants. 1, an ultra-virus claim against all defendants, which means exceeding your power. Number 2, a 10th Amendment claim against all defendants, which is saying that the 10th Amendment's like the catch-all for any rights not set out in the Constitution. And 3, an Administrative Procedures Act claim against Secretary Hegseth and the DOD. Now, the APA is a hot topic here again. And if we're looking at something and it looks arbitrary or capricious, those are the magic words when it comes to the APA. You can get into trouble through the administrative process. The next day, plaintiffs moved for a temporary restraining order. After expedited briefing and hearing, the court granted plaintiffs' motion, holding that defendants had acted ultra vires and violated the 10th Amendment when they federalized the California National Guard without satisfying the statutory criteria of 10 U.S. Code Section 12406. So it's not just that they federalized them, it's that they didn't even follow the law that they needed to set out to do this. So if they had followed the pieces here and at least that, they wouldn't have been in so much trouble here. And they know about this law, everyone. Let's make no mistake. It's not like, oh, they didn't find it. They didn't know. No, this is intentional. They're doing this intentionally. Though plaintiffs also sought a temporary restraining order based on the Posse Comitatus Act, the court held that plaintiffs had not shown that defendants had violated or were likely to violate the act. The court therefore entered an injunction requiring defendants not to deploy the California National Guard in Los Angeles and to return control of the California National Guard to Governor Newsom. Defendants appealed the court's entry of a temporary restraining order, and the Ninth Circuit administratively stayed the order. The Ninth Circuit heard expedited argument and then issued an order staying the temporary restraining order pending appeal, concluding that it was likely that President Trump lawfully federalized the California National Guard under Section 12406 sub 3. The Ninth Circuit explained that Section 12406 affords the president significant discretion such that courts can review only whether the president had a colorable good faith basis for invoking that statute. And that's a pretty low bar here. The Ninth Circuit declined to weigh in on plaintiffs' Posse Comitatus Act arguments, which are like the big ones here. So that's too bad that they didn't weigh in on that. With plaintiffs' motion for a preliminary injunction still pending, this court advanced the trial on the merits to plaintiffs' Posse Comitatus Act claim pursuant to Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 65A2. The court presided over the trial from August 11th to August 13th of 2025. The court's finding of fact and conclusions of law follow. So typically our fact finders, right, are our juries, but here we're in a situation where the court needs to go through the fact finding process here. All right, so findings of fact. So this is a judge. Again, keep that in mind. We're not talking about a jury. We're talking about a judge. So findings of fact, ICE activities in Los Angeles. In early June of 2025, Immigration and Customs Enforcement initiated a series of immigration enforcement actions in Los Angeles, California. ICE targeted several locations in downtown LA and its immediate surroundings that are known to have significant migrant populations and labor-intensive industries. On June 6th, the first day of the enforcement actions, ICE detained between 70 and 80 people and arrested 44. The next day, Customs and Border Patrol officers arrived from San Diego to assist with the immigration enforcement operations. Public protests quickly followed, and at the site of one of the June 6th enforcement actions, a group of people gathered and tried to prevent ICE from leaving. And he's just citing the different exhibits here. All right, so if you're interested, you can go in and look to the Espiritu Declaration, which would be Exhibit D. That evening, crowds of people in downtown Los Angeles protested against ICE's enforcement actions at the Roybal Federal Complex, which houses the Metropolitan Detention Center. Some protesters threw concrete chunks, bottles of liquid, and other objects at Federal Protective Service officers guarding a parking garage gate, while others tried to use large rolling commercial dumpsters as a battering ram to breach the parking garage gate. Oh, that's not cool, people. Protests continued downtown and in several nearby cities on June 7th. At protests in Paramount and Compton, Some protesters threw rocks and other objects, including mangoes. That's just a waste. That's just wasteful. Fireworks and a Molotov cocktail. Now, if you get into this is where you're getting into the felony stage of harm. So that's bad choices right there. Burned a vehicle. Yeah, don't do that. Barricaded a street with shopping carts. Briefly trapped an ICE agent in a car and vandalized property. So, all right. I mean, again, it's like, So, next up, the Los Angeles Police Department and Los Angeles Sheriff's Department responded to these protests and maintained control of the situation. Even before the protests downtown on the evening of June 6th, LAPD had assigned additional officers to the area. When some protesters acted violently at the Roybal complex, LAPD officers successfully pushed the crowd away. Shortly thereafter, LAPD declared an unlawful assembly, and most protesters departed the area by 11 p.m. All right, so they, in general, were listening to the directions and backed away, according to the complaint. All right. As for the June 7th protest, LASD, so the Sheriff's Department, dispatched 200 deputies to Paramount and Compton, including a team with specialized training in handling civil unrest. That sounds good. And the LAPD was fairly in control of the protests downtown. I think that's all right, too. As a result of the protests on June 6th and 7th, 2 federal buildings were vandalized and sustained minor damage. And a DHS fence and 3 government vehicles were also damaged. These protests led to 1 recorded injury to a law enforcement officer, a CBP officer whose wrist was struck by a thrown object. Right, well, that is an unwanted touching, so technically that would be an assault. LAPD made 29 arrests on June 7th. All right, subpart B, deployment of the National Guard. On June 7th, President Trump issued a memorandum to the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of Homeland Security, in which he called the National Guard into federal service. And then we're citing the presidential memo here as Exhibit 17. President Trump's memorandum cited 10 U.S. Code Section 12406 as his legal authority for federalizing the National Guard and stated as a factual basis that, here's the quote, all right, so this is where he's saying, you know, we're going to do this, federalizing, blah, blah. Numerous incidents of violence and disorder have recently occurred and threaten to continue in response to the enforcement by federal law by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and other U.S. government personnel who are performing federal functions and supporting the faithful execution of federal immigration laws. In addition, violent protests threaten the security of and significant damage to federal immigration detention facilities and other federal property. Wow, they're really laying this on pretty hard here. Yeah. All right. President Trump did not invoke the Insurrection Act. That's important to note here. And that would be 10 USC section 251 to 256. And then President Trump's memorandum called the National Guard into federal service to temporarily protect ICE and other U.S. government personnel who are performing federal functions, including the enforcement of federal law, and to protect federal property at locations where protests against these functions are occurring are likely to occur. President Trump also authorized the Secretary of Defense to employ any other members of the regular armed forces as necessary to augment and support the protection of federal functions and property. So this really is, he's just saying, look, the federal immigration laws aren't being enforced, and that's why I need to bring in the military. So it's going to be interesting to see how the judge presents this. He purported to authorize the military to perform those military protective activities that the Secretary of Defense determines are reasonably necessary to ensure the protection and safety of the federal personnel and property. The memorandum never specifically mentioned Los Angeles or California. To the contrary, it instructed the Secretary of Defense to coordinate with the governors of the states and National Guard Bureau in identifying and ordering into federal service the appropriate members and units of the National Guard. So again, you can see how he's expanding on what he thinks is his power here. This same night, Secretary Hegseth issued a memorandum in which he implemented President Trump's direction. And that's Exhibit 18. Secretary Hegseth called 2,000 members of the California National Guard into federal service and instructed that they be placed under the command and control of the U.S. Northern Command. So let's pause for a moment. Look at all these people they're calling in, right? Compared to January 6th. Yeah. 2 days later, Secretary Hegseth issued another memorandum in which he federalized an additional 2,000 California National Guard members. So 4,000 National Guard here. And posted on social media that approximately 700 active duty U.S. Marines from Camp Pendleton are being deployed to Los Angeles to restore order and defend federal law enforcement officers. I mean, is it just me, or are we just out of control here? Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot. There's a lot here. Right. All right, so the 4,000 federalized National Guard troops, as well as approximately 700 U.S. Marines, were placed under the control of Task Force 51, U.S. Army North's deployable contingency command post. On June 7th, a briefing took place at U.S. Army North with the Army North Commanding General, Chief of Staff, Operations Officer, and Deputy Chief of Staff William Harrington present. Mr. Harrington has over 2 years of experience in his role as Task Force 51, and he previously worked for just 2 years. Wait a minute, that's not comforting. I'm going to need some more background on this fella. Right, so here we go. 2 years as an instructor for the U.S. Northern Command, teaching a course titled Defense Support to Civil Authorities, which included material on the Posse Comitatus Act. All right, so there's that. At least he has some information on it, right? At the June 7th briefing, Mr. Harrington stated, based on his experience and training within the Department of Defense, that if any National Guard troops were federalized as part of the deployment, they would lose the ability to conduct law enforcement activities because of the Posse Comitatus Act. And he's right. Good job, person. Everyone at the briefing agreed with Mr. Harrington's assessment. So there you go. And the commanding general assured him that federalized National Guard troops involved in the mission would not be performing law enforcement functions. To Mr. Harrington's knowledge, everyone in the U.S. Northern Command knew that the Posse Comitatus Act applied, and no one expressed a contrary view. So that's kind of big. That's kind of a big deal when you're showing that everybody knew and then they went against it anyway. That's a lot. All right, here's C, Task Force 51's training. So let's see what kind of training that they're getting. I'm not going to have my hopes up, but we'll see. Task Force 51 troops, both the federalized National Guard troops and the U.S. Marines deployed to Los Angeles, received training on the permitted scope of their activities under the Posse Comitatus Act. And it looks like we're citing transcripts here from testimony. The standing rules on the use of force brief that was given by our legal personnel was given to every soldier and Marine that went on the mission. And then they're looking at task force slides here. The training materials for Task Force 51 provided that active duty military personnel may not provide direct active assistance to civilian law enforcement authorities by performing law enforcement functions. unless the constitutional or an act of Congress exception specifically permits it. Task Force 51, training slides at 5. Major General Scott Sherman, the Deputy Commanding General Support for the U.S. Army North and commander of Task Force 51, oversaw the training of Task Force 51. He testified that his number 2 priority after troops' welfare and safety was to ensure that they followed the standing rules on the use of force exactly as was written. Accordingly, he ensured that the Task Force 51 troops knew they weren't allowed to do any law enforcement actions. Law enforcement had to do it themselves. So I love this. They're just building up here, like over and over and over again. We told you you didn't have the authority. We explained the law. You had plenty of information telling you to not go against the posse comitatus. Now, some people might be like, well, what does that even mean? Posse comitatus just means the local law enforcement. That's what it loosely translates from. All right, so next, among other instructions, Task Force 51 troops were told that they could not impede vehicle or pedestrian traffic or block public roads because these are law enforcement functions. So now it's very specific here. How they're going forward. But Major General Sherman's instructions were not absolute. For instance, the Task Force 51 training materials specified the law enforcement functions prohibited by the Posse Comitatus Act. So here's one of the slides we can take a look at here. Prohibited law enforcement functions. These are prohibited. So pursuit. All right, they must mean like hot pursuit, maybe. Arrests, right? Apprehension, search, seizure, security patrols, traffic control, crowd control, riot control. These are the big ones here that they try to kind of sneak around and use. Evidence collection, so leave it on the ground, point to it, and have other law enforcement come in and bag it. Interrogations, that's a good point too. My gosh, that would totally screw up these cases. Don't interrogate. And then informants, which honestly, they probably don't have much access to informants, quite frankly. I mean, the law enforcement has built that up. That's just nothing to do with the military here. Additionally, the PCA prohibits any other activity where civilians are subjected to military authority that's regulatory, proscriptive, or compulsory. So that's their slide. So even this has all been presented to them. So there's no lack of information, and that's great because we don't want a lack of information. So Task Force 51 training slides at 6. Although the training materials list 12 prohibited functions, Task Force 51 troops were orally instructed that the 4 functions listed in red, security patrols, traffic control, crowd control, and riot control, were subject to a so-called constitutional exception to the Posse Comitatus Act. This is when the BS really starts to fly, everyone. Again, this is showing that in the administration next to Trump are people who have a huge understanding of the Constitution and teach it like, Eastman. So he's basically pulling out all of these things and being like, let's try this, let's try that. And Miller too. So that's kind of crappy here. They're like, you can do these things if you use the exception. That's not quite how that works. This instruction came all the way from the top of the Department of Defense down to Task Force 51. And then we've got a trial transcript here. Defendants objected to this testimony as privileged. So making a note, the government didn't want this testimony to be in court by introducing evidence regarding legal advice given by Department of Defense lawyers. That's sneaky. But it came in anyway, so too bad for you. The Department of Defense instructed U.S. Northern Command and Task Force 51 that the President and Secretary's June 7th memorandum created a constitutional exception to the Posse Comitatus Act and thereby authorized Task Force 51 to engage in the 4 functions listed in red. That's not how you do it. That's just, you don't make these kinds of huge decisions by yourself. You've got to get others involved in it. So that's kind of weird. This instruction was initially not put in writing. That's also weird. Eventually, Secretary Hegseth issued a memorandum that explained the scope of the alleged constitutional exception to the Posse Comitatus Act. And Hegseth is not a lawyer, right? Right? So that's interesting. And you can even pull that memo up too here. So we're on training slide 7. Wow. Secretary Hegseth's memorandum issued to U.S. Northern Command directed Task Force 51 to, all right, so this is from his memo, deploy to federal government properties, right, including federal buildings and monuments. When deployed to federal government properties, service members will support federal law enforcement and may take reasonable measures to prevent the destruction or defacement of federal government property, including crowd control, temporary detention, cursory search, such as safety-related searches for weapons, incident to temporary detention. So this is a very this is going hand in hand here with what we call the Terry Pat in the criminal world. So that would be a Terry Pat, and then we would have search incident to arrest is the other one they're trying to use. These are the exceptions to the warrant clause, okay? But these are for criminal levels here, but they're still trying to get away with it around. So measures to ensure the safety of persons on the property and the establishment of security parameters reasonably necessary to protect the property. I don't know. This is really a gray area here. Also, to deploy to support federal law enforcement, to protect federal functions, and to protect federal personnel from harm or threat of bodily injury. Again, though, who makes that decision that there's that threat? Including federal law enforcement officers and other federal government officials and employees. This may include measures for temporary detention, cursory search, and the steps necessary to ensure the safety of federal personnel. Now, when we start getting into this question of safety for an officer, we have an entire doctrine of what's allowed and what's not allowed. So if you are a police officer, there are specific protections put into place, but we're in this weird zone where they're saying, well, federal personnel, and that could be anybody. That could be like I'm trying to think, like anybody, you go up to the counter and you say, hi, what am I supposed to do here? And that person that comes back and says, well, I don't know, I just work here delivering mail. Federal employee, all right? So that personnel safety question is pretty vast here. For example, while other federal personnel execute their duties, Department of Defense service members may provide perimeter protections against third parties and such crowd control measures as are reasonably necessary to ensure the execution of federal functions and the safety of federal personnel. So again, they're using this, a federal law needs to be enforced as a battering ram. They're just like, well, we're here to enforce immigration law, so don't get in our way, including local law enforcement. Don't get in our way. And that's like not how that's supposed to go at all. So that's a violation. Oh, hello, John. Welcome. Kimberly, hello. Yes, excessively. Right. Exactly. So these are part of the memos. So this is that information the judge is looking and seeing what did Hegseth write, and is that in compliance with the law. This memorandum in particular, the second bullet point, asserts that wherever federal personnel go, Task Force 51 troops can accompany them and establish perimeter control, engage in crowd control, and otherwise perform any functions, quote, necessary to ensure the execution of federal functions and the safety of federal personnel. So rather than it just be on federal property, now we're expanding it because they're saying wherever federal personnel go. So it doesn't matter anymore. They're basically supposed to be acting like bodyguards to each individual person. Again, not the role of the military here. All right, so then here we go. Defendants took the position at trial that there did not even need to be an actual threat to federal property, personnel, or functions to deploy Task Force 51. In fact, defendants contend that the potential for unexpected threats to develop would be sufficient to deploy Task Force 51, even where the military's own assessment is that an operation is low or no risk. So here, even the military is like, dude, too far. And he's like, I don't care. Defendants go still further, proposing that even where there's no threat to safety or security of federal personnel or property, the mere possibility that federal law enforcement agents might not be able to do their job could justify deployment of Task Force 51 as a preventative measure. So, like, if people get caught in traffic, right, they're just going to call up the military and be like, hey, can you all come out here? I'm unable to do my job because I'm stuck in traffic. So then they're going to move all the cars out of the way? I mean, come on. This is crazy town here. Exactly, disabled veteran. Absolutely. Task Force 51 troops are trained to report violations of the standing rules for use of force, including violations of the Posse Comitatus Act. There are no known reports by Task Force 51 troops of violence of the standing rules for use of force. That said, in spite of troops' training to report violations, Task Force 51 troops were openly instructed that they could, consistent with the Posse Comitatus Act, engage in some law enforcement actions as long as they were doing so to protect federal property, personnel, or functions. So again, you can see how far outside of the scope they're going, because it started small, like protect the monument. And then it became like, well, this person, works on the 4th floor. We don't know what they do. So you need to follow this person around and make sure that there's a parameter. And it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, the jurisdiction here. All right, so Task Force 51's operations, sub D here. Murray, Murray, it's good to see you. Welcome. Oh, thank you so much, Pariah. Welcome in. All right, so Task Force 51's operations. The first federalized Task Force 51 troops deployed to Los Angeles on June 8th. In these early days of their deployment, it was not clear what role they were to play. Task Force 51 troops were initially stationed at the Roybal complex, specifically at the Metropolitan Detention Center, while protests against ICE activity continued in downtown Los Angeles. On June 10th, several days after the first Task Force 51 troops arrived in Los Angeles, a representative of the U.S. Army North sent an email, quote, coaching federal law enforcement agencies as to what language to use when submitting requests for assistance, which are how federal agencies requested support from Task Force 51 troops. RFA email thread. Oh my gosh. They're trying to, man, I just hate it when people use the law like that to manipulate behavior. It's not right. Specifically, law enforcement agencies were instructed to, quote, substitute protection for security and detect, monitor, and report for surveillance. RFA email thread is showing that if the requested activity cannot be converted to a protection term, the email stated, then we cannot perform it. So this is where we're into the semantics world that this administration just loves to do. They just love taking a word and giving it a different definition and then running with it. And, I think I've explained this before that, many times as attorneys, when we're first getting started or even later on, we'll go out after hours and, hit the cocktail hour, right? And when we're sitting around having the cocktail hour, we talk about all kinds of weird stuff. Like, boy, that Posse Comitatus Act, that's weird. That's some weird stuff there, right? And other people will be like, yeah, that's weird. And they'll go into all kinds of other things like, well, Do you mean weird like the Colorado weird, or weird like the Florida weird? You know, we sit around and we bat these ideas back and forth, never meaning for any of them to actually be used as a defense in court. And so when I see these things that, I'm like, having a Captain and Coke and eating some sunflower seeds. And I'm like, yeah, that protection term, that's crazy. We cannot do protection. I mean, that's just kind of what the jerks do, right? Oh, in my humble opinion, yeah, they keep playing with words. Exactly. And that's where a lot of the worst situations or the hardest hit areas are going to be pulling those words back and redefining them after all of this. All right, the Department of Defense, on that happy note, did not explain what protection meant, nor did it clarify for federal agencies which functions troops could lawfully perform. Pursuant to the email instructions, though, federal law enforcement agencies' requests for assistance included requests for protection of federal property and for force protection of federal law enforcement agents who were conducting search warrant operations. I think too, like, it's very important for us to protect our people out in the field, but then I think of the prosecutors that have been gone after by Mr. Trump, and I think of Jack Smith and the Georgia team. I think of all of those, and I'm like, they were law enforcement too. So here, you're using special words so you can go and be there, but there, it's like, well, you're on your own, and we're even going to try to bring you down. So that's a bummer. Well, on the ground in and around Los Angeles, Task Force 51 troops wore military uniforms, which were green or multi-camouflaged. At least some ICE agents wore camouflage uniforms too. It is difficult, even for someone familiar with military uniforms and insignia, to differentiate between the uniforms from a distance, or where there's a lot of commotion. And then we've got footnote 2 here. Department of Defense regulations require federal troops to have their name displayed on their uniform. Look at that, everybody. That's a big moment. Hold on here. I've got to find that. Get back here. You've got to highlight that, right? That's very important. Federal troops are required to have their name displayed under Army regulation. So they're like, we don't have to tell you. You do, or else you're in violation. Yet some Task Force 51 troops wore body armor that obscured their names. Federal law enforcement personnel in Los Angeles did not display their names on their uniforms. In fact, many wore plain clothes instead of a uniform that would identify them as law enforcement at all. That's so huge. I mean, that's such a huge thing here. Indeed, Major General Sherman and Ernesto Santa Cruz, the Los Angeles Field Office Director for ICE's enforcement and removal operations, and a veteran himself, were both unable to determine whether multiple individuals in a photograph of ICE enforcement actions were Task Force 51 troops or federal law enforcement personnel. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness, they couldn't tell them apart. Task Force 51 troops were also armed, carrying weapons with live ammunition. Task Force 51 responded to 64 requests for assistance in and outside of Los Angeles County. These requests for assistance came from various federal law enforcement agencies, many but not all within the Department of Homeland Security. Yikes. All right, number 1. Why are we back at number 1? Hold on here. I've lost the organization element. Okay, we're sub 1 under D. All right, subsection D, and here's subsection 1. Operations in Los Angeles County. So Task Force 51 troops accompanied ICE officers on approximately 75% of their enforcement and removal operations in and around Los Angeles through mid-July. And then we're looking at ICE Twitter posts here. There's photographs of the task force standing next to ICE agents while the agents detained individuals. Come on, people. The presence of Task Force 51 deterred engagement by the public, especially by those who might have attempted to hinder or protest an arrest by ICE agents. The Marines who were part of Task Force 51 were tasked only with protecting federal property in Los Angeles. One such facility was the Wilshire Federal Building, which houses the Veterans Affairs Office. On June 12th, a Marine briefly detained a veteran who twice attempted to enter the building, but who did not stop when asked, provide identification or state his business. The Marine restrained the veteran's hands in flex cuffs and detained him for approximately 25 minutes. Oh my gosh, that's so awful. After which point, federal law enforcement arrived and took him into custody. The Marine did not question the veteran or otherwise engage with him. Not all Task Force 51's deployments in Los Angeles were related to ICE or other DHS agencies. For example, on the morning of June 13th, Task Force 51 troops accompanied DEA and FBI officers on a joint DEA-FBI operation at a private residence in Long Beach. Task Force 51 troops and military vehicles, in conjunction with the DEA SWAT teams, cordoned off Long Beach Boulevard in two directions from the residence, while DEA and FBI agents approached the residence to look for an individual who had thrown rocks during one of the June 7th protests. National Guard soldiers established their blocking positions at approximately 0600. It was a law enforcement in the lead with our soldiers behind them, end quote. The record's unclear as to whether Task Force 51's blockades prevented any civilians from using Long Beach Boulevard, a public road. Tea break. Sorry. I get so wrapped up. I'm just like, this is crazy. Who can think of tea when this is just bonkers? All right. The record's unclear as to whether Task Force 51's blockades prevented any civilians from using Long Beach Boulevard, a public road, while the operation was going. It's crazy town. We're in crazy town. Like, it's not even a train. It's bigger than a train. It's a full town now. This is madness. Nor was Task Force 51 deployed only in support of federal enforcement actions. On July 7th, approximately 80 Task Force 51 troops participated in a DHS operation titled Operation Excalibur. At MacArthur Park in Los Angeles. So let's look and see what our footnote says here. Number 3, Excalibur is, of course, a reference to the legendary sword of King Arthur, which symbolizes his divine sovereignty as king. That's crazy talk. Get out of here with that king talk, you weirdos. All right, sorry, I lost my cool for a minute. This was DHS's third attempt at the operation, and Secretary Hegseth himself approved it based off of all of his training and experience. Now, footnote number 4 here says, initially, Operation Excalibur was planned to take place on Father's Day and to have Task Force 51 military vehicles stationed on the section of Wilshire Boulevard that runs through MacArthur Park. Major General Sherman objected to that request for assistance, expressing concerns that 1, there would be a large number of people in the park on Father's Day. 2, Wilshire Boulevard was in the middle of the park, the operation's law enforcement area. And 3, the initial proposal to use helicopters would attract large crowds in opposition to the operation. What? That's crazy. Oh my gosh. So Chief Bovino of Department of Homeland Security criticized Major General Sherman for his opposition to the initial plan, questioning Sherman's loyalty to the country. What? Oh my gosh, this is awful. This is relevant because Chief Bovino's accusations of disloyalty go to the state of mind of decision makers who are tasked with ensuring that the Posse Comitatus Act is followed. Oh my gosh, this is just, oh my goodness gracious. Yeah, on Father's Day. Oh, all right, well, that's awful. Operation Excalibur involved federal law enforcement officials marching across MacArthur Park, while Task Force 51 remained stationed on the outside of the park in military vehicles. See, they're just trying to get around the rules. Humvees and tactical vehicles, including at 2 traffic control points to prevent vehicular traffic along a stretch of Wilshire Boulevard. DHS's mission in executing Operation Excalibur was to demonstrate through a show of presence the capacity and freedom of maneuver of federal law enforcement within the Los Angeles Joint Operations Area. Right, they're just trying to get around all the rules. And the operation's purpose was to enable and protect the execution of joint federal law enforcement missions in a high visibility urban environment while preserving public safety and demonstrating federal reach and presence. So they even put it on their own slides. They're like, we're here for the show. We are here for the show. Oh my gosh, summer day camp. Oh my gosh, I bet. Oh, I bet they were traumatized. Like, I'm traumatized just thinking about it. My goodness gracious, so awful. Operation Excalibur was rated high risk for DHS agents due to, among other things, likely crowds and concerns about an international gang presence. So Task Force 51 conducted numerous rehearsals, which were very large and involved all the key leaders of the operation. So is it like, what's that, cosplay? Is that what we call that? When people are going out there and like acting like, I don't know, Spider-Man and stuff, right? I mean, that's cosplay, right? I love Spider-Man. I'm sorry. Side note, Spider-Man, clearly the best of all of them. All right. Despite the risks, oh my goodness gracious, here. Oh my gosh. Associated with, well, here we go. Despite the risks, 3 words, despite the risks associated with Operation Excalibur and the numerous rehearsals, DHS planned to give LAPD only 2 hours notice of the operation. Operation Excalibur slides at 4. So we're still looking at the slides in court here. Further, the risk of inaction, that is the risk of not performing the operation at all, was low due to the lack of any high-value targets or threats to federal functions at MacArthur Park. Oh my goodness gracious here. Oh my goodness. All right. They only identified risk to inaction was the hypothetical concern that, quote, it could weaken the public's perception of federal responsiveness and reduce deterrence in the area the federal presence seemed limited or absent, end quote. I think the trust in the federal presence has been damaged. So I'm not sure you can walk that back. Ultimately, federal law enforcement faced no resistance at MacArthur Park, and Task Force 51 did not need to provide any force protection. So, right, everybody, do you remember kind of the hullabaloo that came out with the soldiers in MacArthur Park? Do we remember that? Cosplay, yeah, exactly. Oh, right. Live action role playing, right, okay, right. Oh my gosh, right. First have to, well, yeah. You know, everybody, yeah, exactly. Not all the hullabaloo. Well, Jason, there was quite a bit. There was a lot, not just a baloo, it was a hullabaloo. Right, the show of force for the cameras, exactly. So the mayor showed up, right, and told him to leave, exactly. But again, now we can see, we have this information. And so one thing too that I'm a little bit surprised about, well, maybe not surprised, but as the judge is going through everything here and going through the exhibits, going through the testimony, I haven't seen, and I'm sure they did this, where the federal government's like, this is all classified. This is all foreign relations. This is all security stuff. So all of this information should be protected. And I'm sure they filed over and over and over again. But yet, if you think about it, this is some significant information as the public that we were not given at the time. Like, this seems like almost new information with the numbers that they're crunching and the intent behind the different movements. So I think this is very important that this decision now is public and we can come out and take a look at what evidence was used. Right. Cosplay treats. That's so funny. It's performative. I know, right? All right, here we go. Back in it. We're in it to win it, everybody. We're on the slides. Further, the risk of inaction, that is the risk of not performing, here was low due to the lack of high-value targets or threats to federal functions at MacArthur Park. The only identified risk to inaction here was that hypothetical concern it would weaken the public's perception, but we got trouble anyway. Ultimately, federal law enforcement faced no resistance at the park. The task force did not need to provide any force protection. So next, we have subsection 2, operation outside Los Angeles County. Right, so we do have a few more examples here. This is gonna take me a couple lives, everybody, to get through this, because we got a lot of material here. We got a whole bunch. We haven't even started knocking on the door of history here. So, right, let's see what we can do here. Let's see. I think I'm gonna need to do many bathroom breaks. I'm gonna need to come back. And pick up where we left off here, because for me, I can already tell my vocal cords are not happy. So this is a lot of material, and I think it's important that we continue to go through it. So I would just say, let's go ahead and plan on another YouTube live here. It's kind of quicker for me to get on TikTok, but honestly, this is made for the YouTubes. It's so much easier over here. It can resume next Tuesday. True. That's a lot. Yeah, I talked to us earlier. Yeah, this is my second live today. So maybe we will pick up then. If I find an opening to come online, like during the day, I still haven't done it during the day YouTube yet, everybody. I'm still trying to figure that out. But yes, Tubin Tuesdays. I'm always here on the Tubes days. But I would like to come back and get another chunk of this done. So I will put up, if everybody knows where that post tab is, right? So if you go to my channel on the Tube, and then there's different things like videos and blah, 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 blah. One of those headings says posts on it. And that's where I can send everybody notice and let you know if I'm going to be on, if I'm not going to be on. So you can go check those posts. And you can let me know too what's going on in your world as well. So just kind of keep an eye on that. But I really do want us to spend some time going through this because I think it's really important. Right. Tomorrow's good. Okay. Yeah, I'll see. I'll see how things go. We'll have to see. Rest up. Yeah, I gotta rest my throat a little bit. Yep. But we do have a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So you know, we'll see what we can do. Just watch for the posts, okay? Watch for the posts. Those should show up as announcements. If you hit the like ring the bell thing, whatever that is, the notifications, then you should get a notification when I'm just posting to the posts. All right. So I'm ready by now. Oh my gosh. So with that, I will go ahead and say my fare thee wells. Thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate all of you. How were the trolls, everybody? Were we okay? Did we combat the trolls all right over here? Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's just a lot. Oh yeah, yeah, John, of course. And Keo, you're working so hard. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your hard work. Yes, yeah, they were great dealt with. Thanks, John. Appreciate you so much. Again, there are several new things that'll be coming over here to the tubes soon. So we're kind of just getting it sorted out at the moment. They were heavy. Okay. Oh, well, yeah. I do have a certain appeal to the trolls. Oh my gosh. Well, with that, I will go ahead and let you go for now. I'll see you all very soon. And I feel like we've got this special thing between us now. Like, we're going to work on the Newsom case, just you and me. So we'll see you.